Jude and her son Lenox sat in deep silence through the last supper before her departure. They were each ensconced in their own armchair, plate on lap. The room was too small for a table or sofa, but the tiny kitchen was not as relaxing as the lounge. They always ate here in the evenings, between velvet-flocked red and gold walls groaning with books, cramped but comfy, often with a Radio 4 play to listen to, or classic FM, the room aglow with the light of sunset. Today they had pumpkin pasta and green pesto with rocket, and goat's cheese, and fresh mangoes that had ripened in the garden of Krishna himself, fattened by flute song and dripping with celestial prana, or so Lenox envisaged as he tasted his. Food was psychotropic to him, as to so many synesthetes. The concentrated mother milk of the cheese had him careering over Grecian hillsides, hairy-shanked and seeking Pan. He was always savouring things, often licorice, or his hair that looks like licorice, and this caused him to periodically pinch his lips in a way that was irritating to his mother, while his eyes swam above them, sensual, abstracted. Like Jude's, Lenox's hair was naturally black, the solipsistic black of the inside of a sarcophagus, but he liked to dye it anyway, to give it the unnatural blue sheen he favoured. It fell frequently over his face, a curtain of darkness divided down the middle, not yet long, but reaching just below the lips, and often sucked. The sides and back were cut at his instruction into a Louise Brooks-style dead straight bob, only sans fringe, and he resembled her also by appearing mostly in black and white. Black clothes, white skin, lips black, teeth still baby milk white. The beauty spot that rested above his lips to the left, sometimes perfected with liquid eyeliner, a concupiscent touch that aged him dramatically and, to Jude's eyes, gave him the look of a 15th century catamite, and made her think of nothing more beguiling than syphilis. Mentioning this in passing, she had received the response, "Oh, perfect, a catamite, It's just the look I was after." She later spotted his dictionary open at catalysed to Catholic. The beauty spot emphatically remained. Unlike his mother, who never wore makeup, his eyes were rimmed in kohl, and their centres were startlingly coloured with the lapis lazuli of a pharaoh's talisman, both bounty and warning. They habitually harboured the self-contained piece of the pyramid, an eerie calm that was in fact chemical rather than contrived. Lenox had inherited from Jude an unusual pathology that kept him focused with peripatetic attention on his interests, and which nullified for him the existence of all else. He was as serene as one who does not know compassion. However, on the night in question, his inner geometry was fractionally askew, as if the scarab that guarded his soul had shifted slightly on the barely perceived vibration of a storm in the desert. Only Lenox was aware of this, or of the possible reason for it. He was 15, and he had secrets in his room. Lenox, his silent repast complete, regarded his mother as she sat with her book, her meal perched on one denim-clad knee. "You might like to borrow some of my nail varnish, the pearl at least," he mused at length. His mother's ragged nails were a bugbear of his, something he found physically painful to behold, and he could make her really angry too, with comments such as, "I'd love to see you in something more feminine, dear mamma. That hideous denim simply ruins your assets." It made her resentfully recall the nagging of her own mother, and to tell him that he sounded just like her, which indeed was the closest he had ever gotten to sampling any extended family. It was just him and her, and one skeletal set of grandparents in Yorkshire whom he had never met, but who sent a shamefully tacky card every Christmas. His interest in the gene pool went much further back, into the primeval forests of his Genesis. When he sucked his hair, he could sometimes taste the ancestral ghosts in it. Their relationship most of the time was not hostile. Its moments of petulance lent it necessary humanity. Usually there existed between mother and son a convivial indifference. This was to be their first extended period apart. His heart chimed a Gothic anthem at the prospect. But the North Sea was merely a new symbol of their habitual alienation, so near and yet so far, and in fact Jude's absence would barely make a difference. He would dip his fingers into the juices and textures of the meals he prepared for himself. He would take his bus money from a bigger pile of coins than usual. He would buy the milk if he wanted it, or he would drink his tea and coffee unadulterated by mother love. Jude looked up from her book. She was reading Brick Lane today. Rafferty won't notice my nails, Lenox. He likes me au naturel, you know. Lenox raised an eyebrow beneath his slabs of hair. It doesn't hurt to make an effort, though, does it, Mother? He always sounded sarcastic, though there was no specific malice in it, simply cold observation. He wound a pointed tress back around his tongue, letting it cut in a little, the top of it flickering against the roof of his mouth and provoking memories older than he. Psychic candy, he calls it. Licorice sticks. He eyes Jude, pouring himself a black coffee from the silver pot, one of their few extravagances. Jude brought good coffee home from the cafe where she worked. They were both connoisseurs of the earthy, bitter or smooth bean and its enlivening effects. The long light moved against the wall, making the gold stand out bright against the dark velvet patterning and slanting over the single-framed picture in the room. The rest of the wall space was taken up by bookshelves. Lenox peered at the painting, as he so often had before. Paul Delvaux's Sleeping Venus, a print from Tate Modern. By the bony light of a sharp crescent moon, a naked woman lies on a possibly levitating couch in a tiled but roofless temenos, a great columned construction with cold mountains visible in the background. A skeleton stands over the woman, whose arms are thrown back in vulnerability or sensuality. The autumnal light emphasised the golden detail to the furniture, the Grecian architecture, and the manes of the two white horses whose heads shine moonlit to the right. A lady in a hat and long skirt glides like one reanimated by necromancy towards the skeleton, while another naked woman raises her arm, apparently hailing her. In the background, more unclothed figures salute the moon or fall in hysteria or despair to the checkered floor, which seems to represent the guerrilla war between good and evil, repressed and rendered civilized. A game of cosmic chess. Lenox had contemplated this theme at some length whilst pondering the picture. One can hear their wails, their eerie bone-pipe keen, as Lenox inspected the picture for the umpteenth time. He thought he also heard a strange music floating from the snow-capped hills. Something entrapping, compelling, that might render Sleeping Venus even more perilously poised between sensuality and terror, luxuriant life and chill-handed death. Besides, you have to realise that Rafferty's tastes are quite different to your own. He wouldn't have gone for me in the first place. And here Jude allowed herself a slow, shy smile. If he didn't like the way I looked, or maybe even something else about me. Her son shrugged, lazily gazing at the figures levitating over Delvo's symbolic dreamscape. He liked that their relationship was as objective as algebra, eliciting a pleasing equilibrium that allowed each to develop with minimal hindrance from the other. He was not subjected to humiliating haircut or enforced duffel coat or any of the other infringements of personal taste to which most of us fall victim in our youth. He was not sent recalcitrant to church or synagogue, or cassocked and conducted by any blush-inflicting choirmaster, nor dragged around in purgatory like so many children on endless afternoons miserably encumbered with their fussing mothers. His obsessions, his paintings, spellcraft and poems were all provided for. Jude gave him colour in tubes, brushes with fine points, and books that had long since gone out of print, with surrealist covers and Jung-influenced plates inside. These were expressions of her own taste, and she passed them on without forethought. She did not share many of his proclivities, most notably his pull towards witchcraft and his fetishistic attention to self-image. While he resembled an escapee from an asylum at which Aubrey Beardsley might have been costumier in residence, Jude tried to look like nothing at all. She wore it well. I'm not dressing up just for Raffles, love. He'd hate me to look tarty. Not that I give a toss either way, incidentally. Yes, well, I picked that up by now. She gave him a wan smile across her pages. I'm a lost cause in the beauty department, as well you know. You're just going to have to live with it, I'm afraid. Anyway, isn't it nice for you to have a plain mother? You're all the more vivid for my lack of effort. After a pause, Lenox nodded acquiescence. But you might like to take something a little special for when you go out clubbing. Clubbing? Jude looked up at him, an ironic twist on her lips. Me out clubbing? Lenox clicked his tongue and wound his favourite lock of hair around a purple-nailed finger. Mother, if you go to Amsterdam and don't go to at least one club, I'll never forgive you. That will be it. I shall have no choice. I'll simply have to disown you forever. You absolutely must, at the very least, go to this new place everybody's talking about. Spiritus. Something made Jude shiver. A goose just walked over my grave, she murmured. What was that word you just said? Spiritus. Oh, God, I can't believe you haven't seen us on the net, Mother. Type in the word Amsterdam on any search engine and Spiritus comes up. It's actually quite peculiar, since the place has only just opened. Wait here, I'll get a printout of the latest review for you. Hang on. Lenox was suddenly very excited. It was rare for him to be so enthused about anything pertaining to Jude's activities. In a few moments he was back, brandishing the pages and pointing at a picture of a darkly luminous construction crouching on a canal. The goose again perambulated Jude's future plot, making her shudder. Okay, listen to this. As well as being Amsterdam's first floating nightclub, the Spiritus experience is the ultimate clubbing high. Spiritus is currently moored close to Uudkirk, but is not simply the historic location, the impressive array of drinks and smokes, the exquisitely mixed music, or the reasonable prices that have caused it already to become a sensation. It is the quirky, fantastical atmosphere and baroque macabre decor that really captivate. Including a dramatic exposition, a short play takes place every night, and crowned by a stunning firework display. Spiritus is the ultimate decadent experience. Go while you can still get in. Lenox pronounced ultimate decadent experience with awed emphasis. So you see, Mother, you absolutely have to go. It might float away next month for all we know. I pray that it won't. I simply must visit it myself. You're far too young for nightclubs, commented Jude perfunctorily. Obviously, I'm aware of my chronological compromise. But you can't blame a boy for being tempted. It sounds divine. I may try to get my hands on some of the bootleg CDs. There's a few circulating already. Everybody says the music there is indescribable. It's probably a right racket, and I can't quite imagine myself fitting in with all those trendy folks, can you? Or Rafferty, for that matter. Lenox shrugged. It only takes a little effort to make a splash. If you'd just be a tad more experimental, Mother, with your hair and makeup, you've got excellent bone structure like me. Good high cheekbones, and those can make anyone beautiful. Your eyes would look fabulous with black or purple eyeshadow to highlight their green. And if you wore something long and swirly, like a black satin skirt with a mermaid tail, for example. Mermaid tail, my foot. Exactly, you could do with concealing your feet. They're one of your worst features, he declared, inspecting them from his armchair with a disdain that almost physically tickled her soles. Thank goodness I didn't inherit them. Most cumbersome, I should imagine. She shuffled her feet against the raffia rug. And your shoes are just unforgivable. Jude felt her temper flare. Right, thank you, Lenox. I'm already well aware that you see me as a sartorial lost cause. But you have to understand, it's just not my thing, and neither is clubbing. We're not all vain and hedonistic like you, she added matter-of-factly. Yes, I had deduced that. But I have a feeling Rafferty's going to want to take you to Spiritus. Yes, I have a very strong feeling that he will. And we both know how intuitive I am, don't we? So I thought I should recommend that you pack something a bit special just in case. She gave him a smile. The thought of seeing Rafferty again was lovely, no matter what the context. And Lenox was probably only trying to be helpful. That's sweet of you, love. But I can't see Raffles wanting to go there somehow. You know what he's like. He'd far rather sit in a pub. He hates all that dance music stuff anyway. He's always said that the last decent modern music drowned with Jeff Buckley. Besides, I don't want to go to this Spiritus place. There's something about it that gives me the creeps. Lenox looked at her curiously. Don't you want to live your life to the full? He asked. Well, of course I do. Well, it doesn't seem like it to me, Mother. All you ever do is go to work, come home and read. You never do anything. Rubbish. I just went to the Gothic exhibition at the V&A. Well, only because I wanted to go and you got swept along with my enthusiasm. Anyway, what's one art exhibition in a month? We live in a cultural mecca. You should be making more of it. Jude clicked her tongue. Right, message taken on board. I'll bear your advice in mind. After all, who better to tell a woman how to conduct her life than her 15-year-old son? Lenox smiled. Precisely. And he demands that you let your hair down on this trip. He says, go to Spiritus for his sake, so that you can tell him all about it when you get home. Right. Prudence is a rich, ugly old maid courted by incapacity. Yep, all right, Lenox, I hear you. No need to carp. Can you be quiet now, please, and let me get on with my book? I was just at a good bit when you decided to regale me. Right, why not exist vicariously? Let fictional characters do all the living for you, he murmured as he glided back to his boudoir. She did not see how he was smiling. He could feel the winds of change pending. Plus, he knew that he was right. When he was 9, Jude had given him a treasury of Edgar Allan Poe, and from the moment he opened it, his euphoria in his uniquity was assured. Now his personality was self-consciously seated in an empty throne that, though never warm, was at least carved to suit a shape akin to his. From childhood hour I have not been as others were, I have not seen as others saw, I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source I have not taken my sorrow, I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone. All I loved alone. Lenox had learnt this poem off by heart for his primary school concert. It went down well. The parents assumed he had dressed up for the part and thought him a splendid little actor. They had clapped affectionately, but their smiles and laughter did not touch him. Lenox was transported by the worlds in the words. True, the purple landscapes described by Poe were not those of Lenox's visible surroundings, but they seemed so perfectly to echo the terrain of his soul that he had painted on his bedroom wall the remainder of the poem in a spiked Germanic script. Then, in my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life, was drawn from every depth of good and ill the mystery which binds me still. From the torrent or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky as it passed to me flying by, from the thunder and the storm, and the cloud that took the form, when the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view. Beneath this he slept and imagined. He generated so much orgone in his bedroom that to enter it felt like wading into water. It was a heavy and conductive current, dense with pheromones, and ridden by the self-conscious succubi of multifarious scents, usually solvent-based and procured from obscure suppliers of occult paraphernalia, potent as unholy water bottled from some lake in Poe's dreamland on which chilling lilies loll. Cars honked outside. The silence in his chamber was permanently subjected to the noise of traffic, for they lived at the edge of the London Ring Road and by a busy street that led to it. Lorries trundled by in the night, and taxis throbbed throughout the day. He kept his curtains closed against the chippy opposite, the Codfather, and against Ahmed's News next door, that was famous in London for not selling porn. Ahmed had long taken a personal stand against the corrupting influence of Page 3, now defunct, actually, thanks to people such as he, and her more explicit sisters. And for a week or so, reporters had gathered and camera bulbs had flashed uncomfortably close to the perpendicular child, who imagined himself to be like Roderick Usher, a hyper-aesthetic recluse cringing from the light. He had to keep the world on the other side of the curtains for as long as possible, and to play esoteric music in which the silence was implied, like the pacing of a really good poem.
Long as Satan and Babylon are walking, they're talking of fire and of ice, of the silence that stalks in the forest, the cries spun out of the worlds, cries spun out of the worlds.
As he lay sucking his hair, deliciously ensnared by ennui, a rictus of diction often encompassed him, the voice of David Tibet reciting the poetry of Current 93. A stringed instrument in a forest, a maniacal minstrel hallucinating Babylon and Satan and how they walked in ever-decreasing circles, and how they talked in accents English and immaculate, and what they found there. Then Tibet's enunciation would turn apocalyptic, its imagery of a pinioned Christ and Hitler and horses and teeth, reaching a crescendo of oral agony, almost, even to the teenager, unlistenable, and cranked up for that reason until his mother screamed. She could take being stalked through the flat by the lean voice full of slavering cunning. She could cope with its sibilant spilling into the pages of her Booker Prize winner. But when it slid up and licked her and howled and pressed into her with its incisors, she had to protest. Besides, there was the landlord to think of. The sedate old chap lived downstairs, with all his faculties still in working order. At other times, when Lenox's visions dragged him to his feet, his limbs twisting like Medusa's hypnotic hair, freeze-framed in the mirror or whirling right through it, he turned to the gentler pleasures of Kate Bush, Mother Destruction, Magicor and Diamanda Gallus. Life braced him like Blake's proverbial curse. As Lenox often quoted with ambivalent imprecation, damn braces, bless relaxes. He was one of those prodigious characters he occasionally read about in fictions. Those sweet legacies of the decadent imagination, the boys whom Huysmans and Wilde would most have liked to have ravished, the sickening, unreal, book-born babies of barren blue-stocking authors, as one particularly embittered reviewer on Amazon had put it. He really hoped so. He hoped he was like them. In so much as he styled himself on anything, it was on his own ideals. However, one would have to have been entirely self-sabotaging and lacking in wit to do otherwise, he reasoned. And these were not listed amongst his faults. If, at 15, he was too perfect, too literary, too beautiful or too contrived to be true, then all the better. We author our own destiny, after all. Entirely unplanned and thus unencumbered by parental aspirations, Lenox had been allowed to grow like an exotic flower on a clipped lawn. He had got by partly because they lived in London, a city that traditionally humours the maverick. He had Edith Sitwell's English Eccentrics on his bookshelf, and liked best of all her section on ornamental hermits hired by the Victorian noblesse to live in their gardens. What a perfect job that must have been. A paid mendicant, rent-a-monk. All of that crinoline rustling on the periphery of the aesthetic vision, a fluttering of lace fans filtering the giggles that must have bubbled on the outskirts of the prayerful life. Lenox yearned for an era in which such things were possible, a time in which the laudanum vision could become a reality. He swathed himself in such concepts and believed with Blake that everything possible to be believed is an image of truth. This made for some pretty interesting ideas. The insularity of mother and son had produced in Lenox a sense of security uncompromised by ephemeral threats, like social services nurses who had harassed Jude in her early years as a mother, and the nosy neighbours who found Lenox's etiolated beauty peculiar or alarming. He called them holograms, with emphasis on the hollow. They had known how to unite in adversity, the child instinctively adept at the art of fobbing off. He and his mother creating a collusive show of affection when required. Behind closed doors they spoke sparingly, and rarely glanced at one another, but such was their own form of intimacy, a familiarity that did not breed contempt, and which allowed their vivid inner lives to flow unhindered. This was the only way that Jude could cope with the abominable in her own past, and with its living legacy, her son. Lenox noticed only rarely the lack of parental solicitude in his life, and anxieties regarding his upbringing were the least of his interests. A geometry of mutual respect shaped the modest cube of North London that they shared. Still, Jude felt a frisson of perfunctory concern that she was leaving her teenage son alone in a flat for the first time, even if under the watchful eye of the landlord. "Are you sure you'll be okay while I'm gone?" It was a question she felt obliged to ask, and it promptly elicited the look of good-humoured disdain that he knew she needed to see. "It'll be no different from usual," he affirmed. "I'll go to school, come home, read or paint most of the night, and when the weekend comes around, I'll spend hours on end in the bathroom." This touch of self-depreciating humour elicited an awkward laugh from Jude. She made it a rule not to comment on her son's use of his personal time and limited space. She did not want him to be warped by what had warped her. Her parental style was as opposite to that of her own upbringing as she could possibly make it. What Lenox did when he was alone was his own business, so long as no extreme danger or noise were involved. She was only vaguely aware that he had been holed up in the bathroom for most of this evening, presumably plucking this and toning that. He let the damp flop of fringe fall forward, ran his fingers through his hair, and smiled quite nicely at her. He's certainly easy on the eye, she reflected ruefully. He had the type of look she used to die for as a teen, when she saw it float by on its magic carpet of coolness that gangly Jude in her floral prints could never emulate. Lenox was embodying more aspects of his mother's psyche than she could ever acknowledge, and that was why she was magnetically repelled by him. The child did not actively aim to attract others. During his elaborate attentions to self, he gave minimal thoughts to the objective effects of his style and attire. He found it necessary, however, to keep close about his person some of the themes that absorbed his nights and preserved his tolerance of what most people call real life. His sense of his own otherness had long been prodigious. Ordinary life held little to interest him, but he knew he must remain relatively proficient in it in order to see what was encrypted beneath the surface. He must swim through the grubby waters of the mundane in order to reach the calm, clear spots far out and view the reefs beneath. Subculture and its symbols were his portals and gateways, and with an outlandish flourish, he wore them visibly and experimentally about himself. He did this neither through defiance nor in search of kindred spirits. His wardrobe was a force of nature, like the boy himself. He was frequently showered with abuse in the street, particularly when passing other schools or the local mosque in his favourite get-ups of Halloween leftover or whore of Shaitan. He paid no heed to any of the verbal gunfire. He was constitutionally incapable of caring what anyone else thought. If he could have bottled this confidence and sold it, Jude would certainly not have been having to work in a garden centre cafe to make ends meet. His unbroken nose was living proof of the effectiveness of this auric armour, the sheer bloody luck with which he must have been born. Strutting around like some conventional flouting black chanticleer, he seemed protected by the gods themselves. There was much in Lenox's life that was strange, and he was glad of this, and on a nightly basis he invited it to cross his threshold. He would perish of boredom, he was quite sure, were it not for these liminal realities he kept at all times wrapped around his being. He did not see his own perceptions as kaleidoscopic, but the worldview presented to him at school and through common knowledge was so patently one-dimensional, so clearly lacking in colour and sense, that he innocently wondered at all the lies. What were they trying to achieve with such concealment? Who were they, anyway? Who taught the teachers? Was the world really run by megalomaniacs who wanted to obscure the truth and create a society of underlings? Lenox had read the household copies of Orwell and Huxley. He knew these concepts to be far from new, and further still from impossible. So his imagination swarmed with conspiracy theories, and many of them seemed more than likely to him, although none explained everything to his complete, albeit teenage, satisfaction. He spent hypnotic days on the internet visiting the virtual worlds of those who believe wholeheartedly that reptile intelligences are ruling the earth, or that Lovecraftian entities have come alive due to all the attention they've been receiving from occultists, or that no one should be worshipped except Allah. In short, Lenox was becoming conversant in the languages of many creeds and cults. But he adhered to none of these, despite the occasional whimsy for kindred. That was one of his few typically human traits. He could deal with this. He saw the world behind the veils, and he knew that his own vision was real. His confidence in his elite sanity was almost absolute. However, after 15 years of self-certainty, something had finally happened to rattle the imperturbable confidence of Lenox. One night last week, after an evening spent trying to astrally project, he had awoken at 03:03 a.m. to find himself standing over his bed. Or, rather, suddenly awake and looking up, he beheld what appeared to be his identical twin standing above him, staring calmly into his soul. His every feature an exact replica of his own made-up face, right down to the fastidious beauty spot, except that the eyebrows were immaculately straight and slanted fiercely down towards the bridge of the nose, giving him a look of extreme menace. The eyes illuminated the head. Indeed, the whole room was bathed in the turquoise phosphorescence that emanated from his demonic double. The vision, if vision it was accompanied by a feeling of dread so intense that Lenox's bed became unsteady beneath him, and he thought that the floor itself might give way. His shaking hand sought the light switch, while his gaze remained ice-locked with that of his other self. When he clicked it, the sinistral twin vanished obediently. An empty space was left where the frowning spirit, the evil eyebrowed self, had been. Lenox had never felt so frightened, especially now that the immediate threat had gone and his consciousness of fear duly increased it. Even now, still trembling, his heart thundering, he already realised what he was truly scared of. Nothing in an unknown universe could have frightened him more than this sudden reversal of the personal familiar, for he already knew that his own imagination had no limits. The scarab of his psychic armour had indeed shifted, and the anatomy of his soul rested in so many portions, in so many canopic jars, in so many different chambers, and he was no longer whole, no longer innocent. And now his mother was going away. "You're going to have a wonderful time with Rafferty, and I'm going to be fine," he managed, the evening before her departure, slipping a bottle of purple nail varnish and matching lipstick into her luggage, just in case. He wanted this trip to work out for her and Rafferty. He was genuinely excited at the prospect of visiting and maybe even moving to Amsterdam, famed for its sex and drugs and, hopefully, ghost ships cruising in on phantasmagorial tides. There were plenty of reasons for one such as Lenox to relish that city. He knew that it was calling to him. Most strongly of all, he yearned to attend Spiritus. He slept soundly that night, warmed in the private crucible of his room, lulled by saline waves on which psychic flotsam and jetsam swirled. He did not know that his mother had picked her way across his garment and book-strewn floor to kiss him in his sleep, nor that she had looked at the jar of paintbrushes and peacock feathers on his desk and almost left him a note, some word of encouragement. But she had not been able to fathom why she wished to do so, or what to write, and instead spent a moment absently caressing a cat's tail that hung from an Anglepoise lamp, a relic of A25 roadkill, and looking into a jar of crushed belladonna, wondering what it might be. As subtle as incense, she vanished from the house.